Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
I am banished back to the dungeon after the guest room has been taken over temporarily, but we are bringing you another episode to catch you up on a rough stretch for Purdue basketball, playing the other three best teams in the conference and losing to all three of them in succession. So the first 3-game losing streak in 5 years for the Boilermakers. We're talking a little football at the end, but we asked you for your questions this week, and we'll just go right to that. And I think the first one gives us a place to jump off on in a number of angles. But since Purdue seems to have trouble playing help side defense, giving up too many layups, dunks, or threes as a result, will Painter change philosophy? Maybe play less in-your-face man defense and make them shoot from distance? I'm not a coach, but the same errors keep presenting. We are not coaches either, but it's also, I think, a difficult thing to ascertain. Yes, the help defense has been a culprit because they've been living, as Matt Painter pointed out, sort of living in help defense, where they've been just relying on it too much. And is that a product of scheme, or is that a product of not getting the on-ball pressure that you want? I think it was definitely the latter on Tuesday at Michigan State, where they were just able to get all of those backdoor cuts for layups and lobs. And I don't see them going away from that man-to-man in-your-face pressure, but clearly defense is the biggest difference between where this team was 2 weeks ago and where it is now.
Yeah, and hopefully I was going to request to talk to Paul Less tomorrow, just even if it's not, an on-the-record thing, just for my own knowledge to find out how Purdue's kind of getting exposed, at least these last 2 games, with teams getting to the basket almost at will and shooting at a high percentage, as you should when you're getting layups and dunks. But I think that we can go back for 2 decades now worth of data. Matt Painter teams don't typically go to zone. They have at times, I think, out of necessity. But he really likes to, he likes to play the man defense, especially out on the perimeter. And what Purdue has done is obviously there's certainly some defensive liabilities with some of the players on the floor, and you try to find the right balance of, I think, offense and defense with any 5 people you put out there. But because of that, you're doing some certain things. I know for a while, Braden Smith was kind of just hiding off to one side and, kind of sitting back and sagging and waiting to jump a passing lane, things of that sort. And he's quite capable of being an on-the-ball defender, but I don't think that Purdue's going to stray away from what it is, 28, 29 games into the season.
Well, I would be surprised if it involved much zone. And
Right.
not just because Matt Painter plays man-to-man defense. It's because of why he has said he doesn't like to play zone is the rebounding liability that he thinks
Right.
it creates. And this team already has a rebounding liability. I don't think they want to confound it with the scheme that they're playing defensively. I could be wrong, but I would just imagine that before even asking that would probably be the answer there. Rebounding was an issue at Michigan State as much as defense was in some ways, that I don't know how you go through a whole game. Like it was deep into this game, and I saw that Trey Kaufman-Renn and Caleb First had combined for 40 minutes with 1 rebound. I think I even turned to you and said, like, look at those rebounding numbers. And there's a lot of nuance that goes into that, like what balls were there to even be had. And they had some weird rebounds in that game, some long caroms off threes for offensive rebounds and things. But it spoke to me of just a general lack of the interior presence that they wanted. And I think there's a couple things that have to happen, because as much as the Michigan State, Wisconsin games have some differentials, Wisconsin famously 20 of 22 from 2-point range, just an astonishing number that you think is almost mathematically impossible at high level college, between 2 high level teams. Not just like, okay, like, Ryder or whoever comes in and you do that to them. I get it. Like, North Carolina A&T, but we're talking about another Big Ten team. We're talking about a team that was first place in the Big Ten, and you do that to them in their own gym. And then Michigan State getting so many interior looks. And I think there probably is some issue with the help or some recognition underneath, but I think it's the problem Tuesday was keeping the ball out of the post in the first place. Once Michigan State got it into the post, the way it was getting it into the post, I think I even joked at one point on Twitter being like, well, Michigan State's getting whatever it wants inside. The upside is Kaufman, Wren, and First aren't in foul trouble because they're nowhere near them when the guy's making the basket.
Yeah, and I was just on a radio show where somebody brought up the fouls, and I did ask Trey Kaufman on Monday, Trey Kaufman-Wren, do you feel like you're being officiated differently here down the stretch? And he said, he didn't say no, but he said he was okay with the fouls he got against Wisconsin. Didn't think that he had a dispute with any of those. Michigan, maybe, a couple of those. But yeah, I think you got to be a little bit more physical, but I think that Trey Kaufman-Wren getting into early foul trouble also allows teams to attack, knowing he realizes he's too valuable to get into any more foul trouble. And you're probably going to be able to get a little bit easier look maybe at times because he's not going to risk picking up a third or a fourth foul and will in turn give you a better looking shot. It's clear right now that this team misses Zach Edey, and it's not because of the offensive side of the ball where he was so dominant. I think it's because you don't have, without a Daniel Jacobson, which Purdue was counting on, that guy to protect the rim and just be like the big force when you get to the basket. It's like, okay, that just negates everything you did getting to the basket.
I think it's much more fair to say they missed Daniel Jacobson because they couldn't have Zach Edey. He was
could if he came back
couldn't
for
play
a
anymore.
Year,
but Daniel Jacobson could have been there. He could have been the one standing under the basket on some of those plays against Michigan State the other night and had a chance to at least you're forcing people to course correct and like alter what they're doing on the way to the basket just because of your size and reach. And they've missed that all season. That was something they thought they were going to have. This was the thing that we were joking about at a pre-practice availability, I think just earlier this week, about how was Daniel Jacobson going to lead this team in blocks and how there were only a few teams in the country that have fewer blocks than Purdue does, or fewer people with multiple blocks, or I can't remember what the exact number was. Chris Foreman, the SID, was talking about it, but yeah, it's been an issue that's hung out there all year long. The other side of that you're talking about with Trey Kaufman-Wren, somebody else brings up another question, so we'll just get to that. In recent years, Purdue could reach magic, in quotes, level with rapid and accurate passing. Now our point guard dribbles and dribbles and dribbles. Braden is super, but is his one-man play what Painter wants? No, I don't think his one-man play is what Matt Painter wants, but I think it's not an easy question because Matt Painter kind of pushed back when he got some questions after the Michigan game about what the offense did after Trey Kaufman-Wren had to sit with foul trouble. And you say, no, we got the shots we wanted. They just weren't falling. They were the same shots that Braden got at the end of the Iowa game, and they made them. So you can't say it's a bad one when he takes it. I get where he's coming from. But just from the eye test, and I think also within the numbers, you can see that when Trey Kaufman-Wren comes out of the game for foul trouble, I don't think it happens every time he comes out of the game. Sometimes he comes out of the game to get a breather, and I don't feel this team falling apart. But when he comes out of the game for foul trouble, I see some stagnation and I see some like panic or something that sets in. And I don't know. I guess it's probably Braden Smith's job more than anyone else to stem that and lead a team through that. But once he comes out, that takes out, if you distribute the confidence that you have in everybody on that team scoring the ball and give them a percentage, and you take a huge chunk of that percentage and put it on the bench for an indeterminate amount of time, then I think not just in Braden Smith's head, but in a lot of players on that team's head, now all of that goes on his shoulders.
Yeah. And at Michigan State especially, I felt there were instances where Braden Smith just tried to do too much. He dribbled into traffic, got caught, and got some just bad turnovers, which is the one thing Purdue wanted to avoid against a team like Michigan State that eats people alive in transition and off fast break points. And it just kind of spelled disaster. There was two instances. I believe he dribbled in, got stuck, and just kind of threw the ball to nowhere, which led to a transition layup or dunk. And then there was another time where he tried to dribble through three guys and got it stripped. And, rather than, I think he tried to kind of plead his case for a foul there where, you're the one that dribbled into all that traffic. You're probably not going to get that call. You've got to be willing to trust other guys to score. And, that's the issue that we were talking about months ago where we were asking Matt Painter, can you succeed with, basically three players scoring almost all of your points every single night? And he said, then yes. But I think that in theory, some other guys are going to step up and give you 5 points, 8 points, 3 points even. And this hasn't been consistently getting that from the entire, depth of the rotations. You occasionally will get like a CJ Cox outburst or a Miles Colvin outburst, but it seems to be like maybe one fourth guy every once in a while stepping up and helping score. And, the big thing right now is I think you have to get more from Caleb Furst offensively just to have that threat when Trey Coppin is not in the game that somebody else in the post can score in the post.
To me, that conversation my answer hasn't changed from what it was earlier this year, which is I think I agree with Matt Painter. It's just that those other 6 or 7, if you include Will Berg, because he did come in and play well against Michigan State for the first time we'd seen him in the first half of a game since Christmas. Like, I don't know, since for a while. I think it's just a matter of those other guys playing efficiently. And that didn't happen against Michigan. That was an example of the big 3 kind of did what they were supposed to do. They played with the impact and efficiency they were supposed to have. And the other 6 guys were kind of just bad. I think it was 4 for 18, no assists, 5 turnovers. And now that doesn't encapsulate defense and rebounding, but in a 2-point game on the road against a team like Michigan, maybe that makes a difference. Any one of those guys having a slightly more efficient night, a slightly better night on offense, maybe makes a difference in that game. And you have to give credit to the opponent for what they do. But I think we have seen that in these highest level games in Big Ten play, now 3 of them in a row, that they're not getting everything they need from the rest of this rotation. Whether that is, are you getting defensive play at the level you need it from those guys against the other team's reserves? Are you getting rebounding at all points of the game? Because it's not really coming from your big men on some nights. Are those things happening to the extent that they need to happen? And I think if you're looking for reasons why Purdue will or won't advance deep in an NCAA tournament, someone could bring this up and say, well, this is why. Like, they are very vulnerable, maybe more vulnerable than other good teams when one player gets in foul trouble or when one player gets contained, because maybe they just don't have the consistency of depth behind them against the best teams in the country. I think that would be a fair thing to bring up until Purdue proves otherwise.
Yeah, and a year ago, people thought it was doomsday as Zach Edey got in foul trouble, which he almost never did last season, first of all. But secondly, when he did, Trey Kaufman just slid over and played the 5, and it was not seamless, but it was not a major drop-off from what you had, at least on the offensive end. And Purdue just doesn't have that right now. If Trey Kaufman gets in trouble, you're counting on Caleb Furst, who's been terrific at times, but mostly is a defensive player and a rebounder more than an offensive player. And you're counting on Riley Burgess, who is getting 3 to 4 minutes every game. So, and we saw what happened when he had to come in a clutch moments against Michigan, and I don't fault him at all for going to the foul line and not making a free throw there. That is a situation that you have to kind of endure over the course of a career to get comfortable being in those moments sometimes. So, I think that depth there probably is a little bit of a concern when Trey Kaufman's not on the floor, especially on the offensive end. But then as a rebounding unit, I was baffled the other day, and I didn't notice it in the game until after. And I said, holy crap, Purdue's 2 leading rebounders were Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. And that can never happen and hope to go on the road and beat a team the caliber of Michigan State.
I mean, it can happen under the right circumstances. But I think the bigger problem was not that they had more than the big guys. It's that the big guys had so few. Right. And again, it's one game. You'd have to go back and watch like every shot to see, like, were they just not getting rebounds or were they not there to be had? I don't know. But with Caleb Furst, I know that he can be a polarizing figure at times. And at one point, it seemed like he was the savior this season, that he had helped this team. I think legitimately had him coming in and playing the way he had lifted this team through an important stretch of this schedule, helped put them back in first place in the Big Ten. And I don't think anyone is asking Caleb Furst to play amazing. I don't think anyone's asking Caleb Furst to become a star. But I do think there is a difference. It's a palpable difference when you can feel his impact and when you don't. Because there are offensive limitations there. And if the offense isn't really going to be there in a consistent way, at least you would, he's getting hands on balls in passing lanes. He's getting rebounds. Like he's doing something else. And you look down at the box and you see later he's accumulated some stats. He's one of their best guys in box plus minus in a lot of those games this season and during that stretch since Christmas. Again, a flawed stat, but still has some meaning. Can be a long-term measure of somebody if they're doing it consistently, and he was. And I thought Saturday or Tuesday at Michigan State was an example where you just didn't feel his impact at all, and the result is almost double-digit loss.
Yeah, and I think, listen, the fact that this is 3 losses in a row, I think if you take any one of these games, sprinkle them throughout the Big Ten schedule at any other point in time, on their own don't look like bad losses. But the fact that it's been 3 games in a row and the nature, kind of some of the issues that we're talking about coming to the surface all at once makes this 3-game losing streak, kind of maximizes that to a degree. And granted, Tom Izzo is the Big Ten's all-time winningest coach for a reason. He knows how to coach teams, how to win and exploit, some of your weaknesses. And he clearly did that against Purdue. My big thing from that is going to be, how does Purdue look at Indiana? How do you adjust, kind of going back to the first question we had, because now you're not good at a certain thing, or clearly these last 2 games not good at protecting the rim or keeping guys from getting into the basket. How do you adjust against Indiana, which is a team that quite frankly is not going to beat you by shooting a bunch of threes usually? So
no, and it's a team that got from what I remember, if I'm not misremembering this, they got Coffin in some foul trouble. He got himself in some foul trouble, frankly, like those moving screens in the second half.
And Trey Galloway lived going to the basket in the second half.
Yeah. And Caleb first had trouble with Omar Ballo once Coffin came out of the game. So I was asked earlier this week on a radio hit, like, what does Purdue have to do against Indiana? And I had actually forgotten about that aspect of it. So that would maybe be the first thing, like Trey Coffin not getting in foul trouble would be a big step forward. And that's harder to do on the road, as he's found out. There's also the whole offensive rebounding side of things, or defensive rebounding from Purdue's standpoint, I should say. Are you keeping a team off the offensive boards? They've done that a lot better over the course of the year, but it always seems like it's hanging out there as a potential problem. And the turnovers that can spring up at any time, as we saw at Michigan State, it isn't like an abundance of them. It's when they happen, where they happen. But I think the number one thing for them right now is just sort of composure. And it's something that they after games always seem to speak with composure. And some of it is just the nature of these guys. Like Trey Coffin is like a very placid guy off the court. I don't know how else to say it. Like he's feisty out there on the court, obviously, but anytime we talk to him in the hall or after a game, he's just he has a chill demeanor about him. Fletcher Lawyer too. I know that he has the persona he does on the court, but off the court, a little bit more laid back, so maybe that's part of it. And they know, having gone through this before, that any 1 loss or maybe even any 3 losses doesn't have to be a catastrophe. But at the same time, you saw the frustrations mounting at Michigan State. I thought it was tangible. You were asking them about this after the game, I know, Sam, and this is going into an environment. Some of that, I think, was just the repetitive nature of how Michigan State was beating them, the kind of doing the same things over and over again. That has to grind you more than losing the way you did at Michigan, for instance. But I think part of Sunday, I should say, is just going to be their composure, and do they keep it together in what's going to be a pressure cooker of an environment. And it's a weird environment. I was just down there for the Michigan-Indiana game a couple weeks ago. Like, you got a lame duck coach, you got a team that, like, is there any possible chance of them making a run for a bad seed in the NCAA tournament? I don't know. Like, it's just a weird vibe right now in Indiana, but certainly they are looking at this as like a chance to. I do these power rankings for us, and I call this kind of their rendezvous at the Alamo moment. It's like, here's your last stand. Like, if your season's going to be anything, you should probably try to beat Purdue.
Yeah, and I think that since the Mike Woodson news came out, Indiana's played better. Maybe not consistently better all the time, but even in losses, I think that they've looked better. They've, competed a little bit more for the most part. And the last time Indiana played Purdue in Mackey Arena was 1 shot away from winning that game. So I don't think that Indiana's going to go into that game thinking, hey, this team is the same Purdue team that came in last year and just waxed Indiana in Assembly Hall. Indiana's got, you're right, has a lot to fight for. I think it's still quite possible they could make the NCAA tournament. Right now, it's possible that these 2 teams play again in the Big Ten tournament. So there's certainly that aspect. And then anytime these two teams play, at least from the fan base perspective, probably more than the players' perspective, it is just a huge deal that gets magnified because of the history of both programs and the history of the rivalry.
We got some other questions that I think will actually be better suited for another week, or possibly even more postseason questions, because they stray a little bit off of the focus of the team right in front of us. But I want to get to one football question, and it leads us into something that you and I can talk about, which is we both had a chance to talk to Barry Odom this week and kind of get some updates from him. Someone asked, did Purdue keep its strength and conditioning coach, or did they hire a new replacement? That is one of the only holdovers from the coaching staff. I think I've been stating it as that Lamar Conrad was the only holdover from the coaching staff. That's not completely correct, because obviously Jason Simmons even stayed around as the director of high school recruiting, but Kiro Small is still listed. I haven't seen him around because we haven't been over there, but he is still listed as the strength and conditioning coach. It was my understanding that he was going to be staying.
So I had asked Barry Odom yesterday specifically about Kiro, because for those who don't know, Barry Odom runs this offseason training program called The Winning Edge, which is, 5 a.m. basically engineered to weed out some of the weak and find out how committed some of these guys are. It's a program that he said he's taken from Gary Pinkel back as an assistant at Missouri under him, and just kind of turned it into his own thing over the years. And I said, is that something that you got with Kiro with, and kind of said, hey, I know you have the way you do things, but we also do this. How can we blend the two? And he said, yeah, it's one of the things he had to talk to him about, was we do this Winning Edge program, and we've got to cater some of the offseason stuff to that. And he said that Coach Rose, which they call him, he did his strength thing for a number of weeks before they jumped into this Winning Edge program this week, which is kind of completely different workouts, it sounds like. But
yep.
The short answer to that is yes, that Kiro Small's still there, and numerous members of his strength and conditioning staff from last year also are holdovers.
Yeah, that's not completely uncommon that you can have a coaching staff change and some of those like internal guys stick around. He did come in with Ryan Walters, so it would have been natural to wonder if he was going to move on, but he was also a really respected guy here. I don't think people thought that strength and conditioning was the problem the last couple of years. And I think more to the point, the players respected him. Every player I've talked to, there's a lot of Kiro Small fans in that locker room. So it didn't surprise me that he was able to stick around. I think he was also under contract for next season, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it. It didn't matter with some of the other guys, but they did keep Kiro Small on the coaching staff. But let's lead into that. I talked to, we both had, 15, 20 minutes with him, and I was trying to touch on a bunch of different subjects. I talked to him about non-conference scheduling. I talked to him for some feature things that I want to write about, various assistant coaches, and general manager Brandon Lee, and how important that hire was. But one thing he did say to me was, I was starting to ease into a question about 2026 and beyond recruiting. And I said, well, I know the focus was getting this 2025 roster set. And he almost like cut me off and was like, well, this 2025 roster's not going to look anything like it does when we get to August. And I thought that was he had already said when we talked to him on signing day that there were going to have to be some additions at the end of the spring, but it sounded more strategic there, that it was going to be, well, we just need a little bit more depth on the offensive line. We need a little bit more scholarship depth in the secondary. And sure, you'll see who comes out on the market who might fit. But this sounded like he expects a heavy influx of talent again in the spring, which I think is interesting to now look at, because they're going into the spring. This isn't a spring like a year ago. Ryan Walters, yes, they had to bring in a lot of new players, but the program was set up. They were getting those guys set for a couple months, and then you had a mix of players that you already knew and the ones that you had handpicked to come in and build towards the fall. For Barry Odom and his staff, the evaluation period is still ongoing for all these guys they just brought in. He said, hey, I've been here 2 months. I haven't seen these guys in pads once. And I think it's going to be an interesting spring of like seeing exactly what they have. And I think there's a good chance that we, the media, will get to see a decent amount of spring practice. And hopefully we'll be able to convey some of that to the rest of you, exactly how this is coming together and where they might need more help.
Yeah, and one of the things I specifically asked Barry Odom yesterday was, you have so many new faces you have to learn in such a short period of time. Do you break that up into the position groups where they learn the guys, you have them kind of delegate to you, and then you learn on a broader scale? How do you, guess basically, how do you go about learning 100 plus new guys in such a short period of time? And he said, well, yes, we did do that. It's much more about those guys getting to know their room, and then he said, but my job as the head coach is to know everything about every single one of these guys. And then, kind of to your point, some of these guys aren't going to be here. I've already, heard of some names that may be looking to transfer once this spring season is over. And that's not unconventional. That's not anything against Barry Odom. It's just the world of college football right now. And some of these guys are working on getting degrees. Why not go through the spring football training and conditioning and then go on to your next program? And Purdue's going to bring in some guys. They might tell some of these guys, hey, if you can find a spot elsewhere, maybe that's in your best interest. I don't know that specifically, but I would imagine that those are conversations that will be had. But yeah, I'm the thing that you just said is very intriguing to me. Is that the media members are going to be able to probably witness more of these spring practices than we have in the past. In the past, we've watched them stretch and do some light drill work, and then we have to leave, and then we come back when practice is over. And anything that happened in between, basically stretching and the end of practice, we're at the mercy of the coaches telling us because we have no idea. And then also we have, kind of to rely on them to know which players are performing well, which guys are standing out, things of that sort.
Yeah, and nobody's really being critical to the media usually. Especially when it's delicate new guys. They're not going to come in and say like, boy, do we have a bunch of issues at linebacker. It's a good thing you guys weren't in here to watch that. Like, that doesn't usually how they come out and say that. It would be nice to be able to see more. I think more coaches should use it as part of the evaluation process, as part of, listen, this is what it is. There's a bunch of yahoos that come in here and they watch you and then they go write about it. Like, you should have that experience the whole time. Tom Izzo at Michigan State, they have open locker rooms after all their basketball stuff because he says, hey, that's what the NBA is. You want to be in the NBA, you should get treated like a pro here. These guys are going to come up and women are going to come up and talk to you, and you get to have your say with them too. And I think I saw this happen at Ohio State a couple years ago, actually, when they were doing a quarterback competition between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown, and Ryan Day opened up the spring a lot more. And I think part of it was because they wanted accurate information to get out, but also that they wanted to see how those guys were reacting to the analysis and critiques that people were putting out there. And I think now they have plenty of other things that they have to worry about. That's not the number one thing they should be worrying about right now. But I do think it could be an interesting way to see how guys handle that, because it's a part of the reality of college sports. What was there something, just one thing from your conversation with Barry that jumped out?
Well, there's probably going to be a few things that I write out of the conversations that we had. One thing that I really thought was kind of unique was he told me growing up, and he was involved. He was a track and field star. He was a great sprinter back in Oklahoma. His family that didn't have a ton of money were taking him around the country to enter all these track meets, and it kind of exposed him because people grow up and they're used to being, especially guys who are going to end up playing Division I sports in the Big Ten, being the best athlete in their hometown or their school or whatever. And that showed him, hey, there's a whole other world out there. And it was kind of his first experience of like, there's another level to this stuff. And he's kind of always had that mentality of like, yeah, you can do good in your little microcosm of, we had a great season at Missouri or something, but you're always comparing yourself to something better and bigger that you want to strive for. And, even if Purdue goes out and has a miraculous 8-win season, I think he'll look at that and go, why didn't we win 9? Why didn't we win 10? And that's just a mentality that I think is probably going to benefit Purdue. And having done the Zoom calls with a lot of the assistants, they all believe in what he's selling or they wouldn't be here, first of all. But a lot of them are also former players who have seen kind of the proof in the pudding, either as an assistant coach under him or as a player under him.
Yeah, one thing that struck me about those assistant coach, we got to wrap things up, but one thing that struck me about those was that it reinforced to me that a lot of these guys, well, almost all of these guys, very few exceptions, are people who have worked not just with Barry Odom, but for Barry Odom. Like, they know what it's like to report to Barry Odom. Like when Ryan Walters came in, for good or for bad, it was a lot of like theoretical stuff. Like people believed in him, I believe. He's a charismatic guy, knows football. I think they believed that he would get things going in the right direction. With Barry Odom, it's not anything you have to like believe. It's just you experienced it. Like it's a different kind of thing. You feel it, like you were in it. You know the process and how it works and what it leads to. And I think that's something. If the coaches are bought into it from day one in fully, then I think it's easier for the players to buy into it. And whenever you talk to people about how does this thing get off the ground the right way, they all say it's about the buy-in of the players.
Yeah, and a conversation I had yesterday, not with Barry Odom specifically, but with somebody else after, was that Ryan Walters may do very well at Washington and get another head coaching job. And if he does, he'll be way better off for it because of this 2-year stint at Purdue. And they said, look at Barry Odom at Missouri. He made a lot of mistakes early on because he was a first-time head coach. And sometimes you just have to go through those. And then he goes back to being a coordinator at Arkansas, goes back and gets another head coaching gig, and is way better off with what he did at UNLV over 2 years to set himself up for where he's at now at Purdue. I had mentioned, what did you learn in being fired? I think I even said it that way. Did you have resentment? Was it kind of like, oh, I made some mistakes and you own up to it? And he said, yeah, it kind of like puts you in your place, but it also made me way better when I went to Arkansas to be a coordinator again, because I had this whole different kind of background knowledge of, where you're coming from as a head coach.
So we'll have more at IndyStar.com and at JCOnline.com from that conversation and some other things. Spring football starts in just a couple weeks. March 4th is the first practice. March 5th is pro day. March 6th, another practice. March 7th is men's basketball regular season finale at Illinois. It's going to be a busy couple of days there around Purdue football and Purdue basketball. So keep listening to Boilers Extra. Thanks for joining us.